Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Europe. Good morning, the United States. I'm delighted to have you all join us here for the very first of the EV Summit's online series. We're taking the event digital, and I'm delighted to say that we have an incredible lineup of speakers for this first EV Summit online series, where we focus on the electric trucks sector. During the course of this debate, we will be speaking to 5 excellent speakers to ask the question, how do we drive electric trucks faster along the road to electrification? I'm delighted to say that those 5 speakers will be Heidi Sickler, who is the Director of Energy and Zero Emission Vehicles for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. The Silicon Valley Leadership Group are our partner for this very first of the EV Summit's online series. Other speakers are Rob Fowler, the CEO of Volta Trucks, super exciting electric truck startup. We are also partnered with and joined by Claire McConnell, the Director of Business Development at Proterra. And other speakers are Brad Kavin, who is the co-founder of Lieef, a new investment shop, and ex-BlackRock, and also by Adam Barmby, the CEO of the e-cargo bike startup EAV. So delighted to have all of our speakers join us for the first of the EV Summit's online series. We will have, like the EV Summit itself in the real world, a very innovative and creative, disruptive new format to this approach to our digital events. This will see me ask 5 minutes of questions to each of our 5 speakers. Then I'll throw things open to the online audience, whereby you have the chance to ask each of our 5 speakers questions yourselves. So we'll have 5 minutes of questions for each of the speakers after my questions. And then at the beginning of this entire process, we'll have an online poll where we will be asking the question of our online audience, which do you think is the most important lever for progressing the electrification of the truck sector? As attendees, you should see on your screens now that poll with those 4 categories. Do you think the electrification of the truck sector will be driven primarily by technology, by policy, by marketing, or by investment? So if you would take a moment, please, to vote for one of those 4 categories. Then at the end of the EV trucks discussion, we will come back to this poll to get a sense of how your ideas, your sense of where the key lever for the electrification of the truck sector should lie. So if you wouldn't mind voting now, please, then we will come back to the poll at the end of the summit. So where are we now? The poll now says that 37% of you think that technology is the area that will drive the electric trucks sector. Interesting, coming out as in second place, actually, behind policy, which has just come in at 39%. So perhaps, Heidi, one for you to focus on in your opening chat from the Silicon Valley leadership side of things. Investment is a third at 20%. And as a marketeer, I'm slightly disappointed to see that marketing comes in a lowly and rather paltry 4th place at 4%. Let's see if I can make the case for marketing being a rather more interesting driver of electrification in the truck sector. So we'll come back to the poll at the end of the discussion to see if anyone's attitudes have changed. But to jump straight into the debate, I would very much like to introduce our first speaker, who I'm delighted to say is Heidi Sickler, the Director of Energy and Zero Emissions Vehicles at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Heidi, it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to this, our very first of the EV Summit's online series. Heidi, please could you start off by giving us a little bit of an insight into your background and to the work of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group?
Yes, certainly. And good afternoon to you and your team, and good morning from California. Thank you very much for inviting the Silicon Valley Leadership Group and our member company Proterra to participate in the EV Summit. And thank you very much for GreenTV's continued leadership and dedication during these challenging times. As many of you might know, the leadership group represents nearly 340 employers on issues that affect the economic health and quality of life in Silicon Valley, including energy, environment, transportation, which we'll be talking about today, education, housing, healthcare, tax policies, and economic vitality. And in California, we're seeing that supportive policies are a key driver of medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. So I wasn't surprised to see the 39% poll result there. As you know, California has a goal of deploying 5 million zero-emission vehicles on the roads by 2030 and 250,000 EV charging ports by 2025. Our 2020 work plan reflects the importance of zero-emission vehicle policy in Silicon Valley and California. We strongly support the deployment and long-term utilization of light, medium, and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles and EV infrastructure to help meet California's greenhouse gas reduction goals. Our OEM member companies, including Proterra, Tesla, General Motors, and BYD, and EV charging companies, including ChargePoint, NLX, and Volta Charging, are leading the electrification of several segments and are looking to electrify additional ones, including commercial trucks and vans. The leadership group has a legacy of supporting increased investments, incentives, and policies that advance our ZEV goals, including increased multi-year funding for the light-duty sector, which here in California is called the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, as well as medium and heavy-duty incentives, which are called the Hybrid and Zero-Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Program. We've also been strong supporters of electrifying public transit buses. The Air Resources Board policy is called the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, and we've also supported electrification of airport shuttle buses. And we have also taken a support position on the 2019 ARB staff proposal on the Advanced Clean Trucks Zero Emission Mandate, which we'll be talking about today. So, and altogether, we strongly continue to support accelerating transportation electrification for several reasons. First and foremost, while California leads the nation in expanding the use of zero-emission vehicles, the transport sector continues to be the largest contributor of carbon dioxide greenhouse gas released into our cities and surrounding communities, accounting for 40% of statewide emissions. Regionally, the Bay Area has experienced a 26% drop in carbon dioxide greenhouse gases due to the shelter-in-place orders, but traffic and greenhouse gas emissions in the Bay Area are expected to rebound as the health orders are lifted for essential sectors of the economy. However, on our current emissions trajectory, California will not meet its SB 32 greenhouse gas reduction goal of reducing emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030 until 2061, unless we aggressively reduce emissions by 4.5% annually. So vehicles powered by fossil fuels continue to release toxic air pollution into California's communities, and they're having detrimental impact not only on air quality and public health, but climate change and sea level rise, which our members are very concerned about. Secondly, accelerating ZEV adoption in California could provide a massive economic stimulus, resulting in more than 394 new jobs if achieved at a rate in line with meeting the state's climate targets. So we see our manufacturers leading the development of ZEVs and manufacturing ZEVs in state, creating thousands of quality jobs and providing long-term career paths and skill trades. As a matter of fact, battery electric vehicles are now the state's #2 export by value. And lastly, California is 30% or about 300,000 ZEVs short of our goal of deploying 1 million ZEV by this year. So we really need to continue to support these policies to achieve these goals. To reach the 2030 goal of 5 million ZEVs, the number of ZEVs on the road has to increase by 18% annually in order to reach our 2025 goal of 1.5 million ZEVs. So for these leaders, the leadership group supports policies and investments in emerging technologies such as ZEVs that will modernize transport systems, support local manufacturing job growth, and improve local air quality.
Thanks so much indeed for that opening gambit, Heidi. I think that the clue is probably in the name. With the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, you're clearly demonstrating leadership in California. What do you see going on in other states, maybe at the federal level, with policy levers in other governments worldwide, particularly in the light of the crisis and how perhaps the future has been fast forwarded? Do you see the policy framework as being a major encouragement worldwide and across the US in general at the moment?
Perhaps. I think California certainly led the way and served as a model for other states, specifically here in the West, to adopt their own ZEV standard. But I know that here in California, we're definitely facing and grappling with some financing constraints here in terms of public investment. So they might also be tracking us very closely there and seeing how we'll respond to the budget cuts that have been proposed here in California to support electrification of the transport sector.
And is there a particular emphasis on trucks versus, say, passenger cars or other categories? What's your sense of that split within California?
Yes, I definitely see a shift among our partners and when the leadership group to, at a time when there's uncertainty about how employers and employees will adapt to, the changing circumstances of the impact of COVID on transportation options, perhaps to take a closer look on how we can more aggressively electrify delivery and logistics. So to that extent, we're looking at what the Air Resources Board will put into place on June 25th. They're scheduled to vote on the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, which would require OEMs to increase their sales for EVs by starting in 2024.
Right. Another question from me. Within the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, which of your members are particularly active and particularly active around the electrification of trucks side at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So last year, our member company Proterra launched a vehicle electrification solution service for truck makers, which Claire McConnell will discuss. And, as you've heard, probably Tesla announced is scheduling production and deliveries of its semi-trucks. It's in 2021, and General Motors will have its first electric truck also go into production late next year. And then, as you know, BYD has delivered its 100th battery electric truck in the US. So certainly those four OEMs are leading the charge, so to speak, here in California and electrifying the truck sector and hopefully worldwide as well.
Very good. And marketing came in a poor fourth in the opening online poll. Perhaps marketing has been a key function for some of the more interesting players like Nikola, who have just announced an enormous valuation. We tend to focus on battery electric vehicles here, but obviously hydrogen is a really important element as well. What's your sense of what's going on with that side of things?
With hydrogen, certainly, yes. It's still there. There is a mandate here in California as well. And the California Energy Commission is currently investing or proposing to invest $20 million a year in that infrastructure. It's part of our Clean Transportation Investment Program, which we'll actually be discussing this Friday. It also includes $134 million over 3 years for medium and heavy duty electrification and $132 million over 3 years for light duty electrification. However, in light of the proposed budget cuts, we don't know what the long-term outlook would be, but you can also take a look at the investments that utilities are making with the support of ratepayer funding to electrify those sectors, the heavy duty and medium duty.
I'll move on now to our second speaker, who is, I'm delighted to say, Rob Fowler, the CEO of Volta Trucks. Difficult to imagine a more exciting startup in the space than Volta Trucks. Rob, extremely pleased to have you involved in this, the first of the EV Summits online series. Again, Rob, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and giving us a bit of a background for those who don't know to Volta Trucks and to the mission of the company.
Sure, thanks Ed. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. So I'm Rob Fowler, I'm the CEO of Volta Trucks. I took over in February, talk about a fantastic piece of timing to take over a startup in the middle of coronavirus, or at the start of it, but been a whirlwind since then. Prior to Volta Trucks, I spent 10 years in logistics for a well-known UK and European carrier called DPD, heavily involved in their electric vehicle commercial EV programs, charging infrastructure, general city centre dynamics, and how actually final mile activity works inside the city centre. Joining Volta Trucks, really great opportunity for me, sort of came from a logistics side where you could see a shortage of supply in the marketplace, and then moving across with an opportunity now to help unlock that supply and increase the number of EVs available for commercial operators. Volta Trucks is building a 16-ton electric vehicle. It's a startup based in Sweden. We have a team spread across Europe with focuses particularly on the London and French markets, or London and Paris markets, but actually also with a plan to scale across most of Europe in the future. Company really has been founded actually around redesigning the entire commercial vehicle concept, around the design of the cab, with actually not just an aim to electrify the vehicle, but to build one of the safest commercial vehicles on the road. Very specific use cases. You're not talking about running 400 or 500 mile trunking routes, talking about city centres where the air quality is poorest, where the safety is the worst, where there's significantly disproportionately high number of accidents involving HGVs and cyclists, and really focusing on where you can have that biggest impact very quickly. So Fortunate to join the company in February. We've had a massive customer traction, even through coronavirus, as people come forward to actually looking to deploy our vehicles in the first half of next year.
Thanks so much indeed for that, Rob. Super exciting plans from a super exciting startup. I know technology is a super important part of the Volta Trucks mission. Could you tell us a little bit more about the technology you're investing in and why for Volta technology is so important?
Sure. I think the really interesting thing for me is actually the technology is now becoming readily available to start the electrification process. So the excuses that people have had over the past 5 or 10 years about actually barriers to entry are rapidly being moved away. I think on top of that, there's a much better education piece. People understand the total cost of ownership. They understand that batteries are going to continue to improve with time, therefore their deployment options increases. But actually the technology is really at the heart of it, and so we're looking at the electric drivetrain very differently. We haven't just taken a diesel vehicle and converted it by taking the engine out. That allows us to change the cab position, it allows us to put the batteries where we want them, allows us to bring the driver down to Y level and to put safety and security systems around the vehicle. So actually the technology is not just in the electrification here, it's across the platform of the vehicle, how that vehicle interacts with other vehicles inside the city, how that vehicle talks to its owners, its operators, to really give people both a solution to electrify their fleets, but also to make their operation more efficient and add value for customers in that way. I think really the heart of this is we see significant improvement in the quality of the drivetrains, of the battery provision, of the electrical systems coming forwards, which has really enabled us to develop a very high quality product.
Very good. So our poll tells us that the policy framework is in a very interesting place. Heidi has outlined some incredible policy initiatives coming from California. The technology is there. It's a great moment to be investing in electric trucks. Let's move on to investment. Where do you feel the investment landscape lies at the moment for electric trucks? Surely Volta is very well placed to pick up on some interesting new flows of equity into this sector.
Yeah, I think just in general, there seems to be very much a shift in investment strategies around the sustainability proposition, around green tech money coming forwards. And actually, the sort of coronavirus shutdown has just very clearly proven that link between air quality and transportation inside city centres, about bringing investors forward who are very, very interested in this space and perhaps are looking for alternative propositions are coming forwards at this point. I think the other kind of extension of this is that as policy is starting to shift around quite rapidly, and you're starting to see more aggressive regulatory frameworks coming forward from a variety of different locations. Actually, that mandating of zero emission vehicles is definitely starting to drive a shift in certain marketplaces towards people looking at procuring new types of vehicles.
Very good. So there are lots of questions coming in for you, Rob. I'll come on to those now. There's a question about battery density and weight being an issue for a long time. What's your sense on how quickly that issue is being resolved in the trucks sector?
Yeah, I think there's 2 bits here, right? We are not building, like I say, a 500-mile HGV solution. So actually, our initial product offering is a 150 to 200 kilometre window, which we know for urban distribution model is well within the ranges which these vehicles are doing on a daily basis. So that's the first point. We have a modular battery system that can scale if it's needed to. And actually, a lot of our customers are talking to us about volume rather than weight payload being more of an issue. So the objective we had was to build a vehicle which can hold 2 Euro pallets side by side. So effectively, you can double the footprint of Euro pallets. Therefore, actually, more of our conversations are around volume rather than payload. I think the other thing which we know is battery prices are coming down, which makes them scalable. If you look at the Bloomberg numbers going out to 2030, they've already collapsed quite considerably since 2018, and they will continue to do so going forward. But some of the academic research that I'm seeing is showing actually chemical constitution changes in batteries are a very feasible solution as well to improve that mass, weight and energy density.
Very good. Finally, Rob, there's another question coming here from Jim Gregg, who's asked the question, what's the biggest hurdle driving mass adoption in the electric trucks sector?
For me, there's clearly a supply issue, which we're hoping to fix. I have first-hand experience of trying to electrify a commercial fleet. Actually, one of Volta Trucks' propositions is around actually simplifying the electrification of commercial vehicles. So if you're a large operator and you generally speaking have resource and knowledge, it's very, very easy to go out there and find the right types of provisions to allow for electrification. But actually in a long tail marketplace where there's lots of SMEs running 15 to 25, 30 trucks, where they just don't have that depth of knowledge, one of our service propositions is actually around building the entire electrification piece. So you don't just come with a truck, you come with charging installation, with hardware, with driver training, with maintenance networks, because a lot of service networks are set up for diesel, they're not set up for electric. So actually, we see a challenge around both actually educating people around how the total cost of ownership works, but building a full service provision for an organisation who wants to electrify their fleet.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. There are a whole bunch of other questions. You've certainly prompted a lot of interest from our audience, so thanks very much indeed for that. Unfortunately, there's not any more time to ask more questions of you for now, but once again, thanks very much indeed, Rob. We'll come back to ask more questions at the end. So yeah, thank you. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to say, is Claire McConnell, who's the Director of New Business at Proterra. Claire, absolutely delighted to have you join us also from the US. Once again, Claire, it'd be great if you could just open up the conversation with a little bit of an opening gambit, a bit of an insight into your work at Proterra, please.
Great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire McConnell. I lead business development for our Proterra powered business unit, which is Proterra's business unit that takes our core technology, so our batteries, chargers, and drivetrains, and helps other commercial vehicle manufacturers electrify their platforms. I've been with Proterra for about 3 years now, and prior to that was at Tesla Motors, so have been in the electric vehicle space now for a while, and happy to be here today.
Very good. Thanks so much for that introduction, Claire. And so, as an opening gambit question, which of the trucks in the truck sector do you believe will electrify most quickly? Yeah,
so at a high level, we see that vehicles that operate in urban environments that use a lot of fuel, so have poor fuel economy, and that travel many miles, so high annual mileage, will electrify most quickly. That's why transit bus is a great application for us to focus on, and that's our primary business, because it is using it goes 44,000 miles per year and travels at 3 miles per gallon, so it becomes very easy to pay back a battery with those kinds of statistics. We see, as we look to other trucks, we see drayage, refuse, and delivery vehicles being some of the most attractive for electrification. They are all also operating in urban or port environments that are focused on electrification and air quality, and they have poor fuel economy and travel many miles.
Very good. So tell me a little bit about the technologies that you're working with at Proterra. How are you working to electrify the trucks sector?
Yeah, so we take our core technology, so as I mentioned, our batteries, our drivetrains, and charging hardware, and we work with other commercial vehicle OEMs to help them electrify their platforms. So that can be supplying any number or variety of those components, but we also work hand in hand with our partners to help them electrify the platforms. So we have experience doing this on our own bus, which our partners really appreciate. And we've announced 4 partnerships to date. One with Thomas Built Buses, a Daimler subsidiary, on a school bus. One with Thomas's subsidiary, Freightliner Custom Chassis, on an electric delivery vehicle. And then we've also announced partnerships with Von Hool and Alexander Dennis as well.
Very good. Sounds like you've been doing a great job as the head of business development there. I congratulate you on that. And it also sounds like you're very excited about the growth trajectory for the trucks sector. Again, if our online audience would like to ask some questions, do hit the Q&A button in the Zoom window there. We'd love to hear from you. A last question from me then. Which truck manufacturers do you think, Claire, what do you think they should know about battery and drivetrain technologies when electrifying their vehicles?
Yeah, so one of the most important things that everyone probably thinks of right away, as they should, is the battery, and understanding that the battery that you design or select is well suited for a commercial vehicle is super important. Commercial vehicles drive many more miles than passenger cars and are operated in harsher environments. So a transit bus goes about 4 times the number of miles than a passenger car. So at Proterra, we design our battery from the ground up to be for a commercial vehicle. So that is super important to think about and understand. We also test our batteries to the highest safety standards, so that's very important. Following on from that, though, the battery is, of course, not the only thing that changes in an electric vehicle. So figuring out charging is very critical, and making sure that your end customers know how they're going to charge their vehicles and that you partner with them on that. And then also the vehicle design. You don't just plop a battery into a vehicle and it becomes electric. So it's been a big benefit for our Proterra powered business unit to be able to partner and work with our end customers to help them design the vehicle as well.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed for those insightful answers. There are a few questions coming in then from our online audience. Brett Willie has asked, so what's the current US government doing to incentivize the shift to electric vehicles? Perhaps more one for Heidi. How has that policy framework influenced and assisted you in your work on the commercial side at Proterra?
Yeah, I think we at Proterra see technology and policy as big drivers of the transition, and have certainly benefited from that. Technology for us has been the primary driver. Battery costs are coming down really rapidly, which has benefited us a lot. But certainly policy is important as well. We are seeing federal policy driving this, but there is a lot of state and local level policy that is impacting. For example, many cities in the US and Europe are committing to transition their entire bus fleets to electric. California has made a full transition commitment, and many cities throughout the US as well. So that's been one of the big drivers for Proterra as a business, but certainly there are also many incentives and policy structures that are driving this transition, and Heidi can talk to that more.
Yeah, very good. Good, well, thanks very much indeed, Claire, for that interesting take on things from a Proterra perspective. I will move on now to our third speaker, who is Adam Barmby, the founder and CEO of EAV Cargo. Adam, delighted you could join us here today. Again, once again, to start off, tell us a little bit more about you, and tell us a little bit more about EAV Cargo. We are introducing you as the only e-cargo e-bike speaker, so perhaps a wider sense of how you feel the e-cargo bike sector fits into the electrification of trucks.
Yeah, my name's Adam Barmby. I'm a designer that can make things. I've been in business for over 12 years now, and Eve was created as a sort of a product that we could hit the market with from the ground up within the e-bike rules and regulations. Our vision was to transform urban and transportation, building an e-cargo solution that's intelligently engineered to power urban logistics and commercial use, and into the future personal transport as well. We wanted to sort of create this new generation vehicle that had sort of true zero emissions, and really sort of try and capture an audience that didn't necessarily want to transfer over to an e-cargo bike, but bridge the gap between an e-cargo bike and a van, and produce a vehicle that would instantly fit into most people's fleet mix. We're based in the UK. We're passionate about British manufacturing, and most importantly, sustainable manufacturing. So we use biomaterials in our bodywork production, and recycled materials in our chassis and hardware, etc. And yeah, we're starting to ramp up our production facility again in the UK, and looking to roll out into international sales and into different regions that, like Heidi was saying, we know there's a large opportunity in the US, and particularly in Europe and Scandinavia. So.
Yeah, thanks so much indeed, Adam. I mean, it's a super exciting time for the e-bike sector, with governments announcing investment worldwide, and that unlocking a lot of potential customers. Could you give us a flavor of the kind of customers that you're talking to at the moment?
Yeah, so we're dealing with large blue chip logistics and postal services. Obviously, the lowest hanging fruit in the market, but I think COVID-19 has really sort of changed people's perception of where our vehicle could be deployed, particularly in food, groceries, deliveries.
Adam, my next question to you is, tell us a little bit more about the first and last mile side and how you think that connects with the more traditional truck sector. What's your sense of that side of things?
Yes, I think what we wanted to do is bridge the gap between what the e-cargo bike can do for people, but create a vehicle that had user appeal and that sort of instant curbside appeal that a large blue chip corporation would want to put their branding on. And really, we see our vehicle replacing that small van within the inner city, and us working and cooperating with larger vehicles, much like the Volta vehicle that Rob is obviously promoting at the moment. So, that link between first and last mile is going to be very important going into the future, and actually creating a solution that gets from that first mile through to the last mile without it being super complicated or having to work with these legacy logistics companies that are sort of very fixed in their way of thinking. I think by opening up the design box, as it were, and trying to innovate new ways in which you can get product from out of city into inner city with the minimum amount of changeovers of vehicle is going to be key. And going from a very large vehicle to a very sort of small vehicle and operating what's known as the hub and spoke model is very much where we see our vehicle thriving in not just sort of post COVID-19, but right now, and before.
Thanks so much indeed, Adam. I took the time to look up the verb to truck rather than the noun truck, and I think it nicely describes your model around that hub and spoke, first mile, last mile approach to things. The verb to truck is to roll along, especially in an easy and untroubled way, which is, I think, how you see the role of e-cargo bikes connecting up with the traditional trucks sector. So a last question from you. I know you're an industrial designer by background, and your technology is remarkable. Tell us a little bit more about the technology in the EVE e-cargo bikes.
So yeah, I mean, there's two sides to it. We've on one hand tried to be brutally simple in our design. This vehicle has to be very, very low maintenance. One of the largest issues with e-cargo bikes is that they're incredibly high maintenance, and they're not necessarily built for the operation they're being used for. We've very much, we're a group of automotive engineers that have engineered down from a van to a bike, rather than started out as a bike manufacturer and tried to engineer up to a heavy goods vehicle of some description. So we've kept it very simple in our engineering, but coming forward into the future, there's the obvious app-based connectivity and our sort of driver and route optimization that we're working with a few people on. One of the major things that we're looking at doing as well is this route mapping and trying to capture the big data that large corporations actually require to, again, further optimize their delivery methods. Because it's not like picking up Google Maps and using the same routes through the city centre that the van does. We can very much optimize through cycle routes and operate through pedestrian zones, and it just completely changes the landscape of your delivery using a vehicle like ours, and it really does improve efficiency by we have figures between 20 and 30%. When compared with normal vans in inner city, similar scenarios, both in London and places like Amsterdam, for example.
Very good. I think there you've answered, a number of questions have come in to you from the online audience. You've answered one of them from Divak Ashok, who asked, what data sets do you feel important for e-cargo delivery vehicles? So I'll move on to another question from Richard Scrace, who asks, how important will it be for your vehicle to run in cycle lanes?
I mean, it is important. Obviously, there are massive efficiencies in running in the cycle lanes. There is a clear fine line between this being a vehicle and a bike. Clearly, it is a bike because you're pedaling in order to get your electrical assistance. We're a meter wide, so it's not a very large vehicle. But equally, we've had to make sure that from a design point of view, it's accepted by bicycles as well as cars, because this is going to be on the roads as well as being in cycle lanes. So we've had to design and develop it and engineer it to be used in both scenarios.
Very good. Finally, there's a a testing question from an anonymous attendee who asks, can you give some real world examples of commercial viability of e-cargo bikes? Is it profitable?
So, I mean, all of the figures that we've got so far, and the data that we're gathering from mainly European countries and the customers that we have out in Scandinavia, they have the infrastructure already. So for them, it's a very easy business model for them to sell, especially for the postal and logistics services. So that there's no issue there. In the UK, we're still a bit behind on our infrastructure. So from a real world point of view, I think we are mainly looking at European and US adoption, and the UK will follow suit. Given there's just been £2 billion worth of UK investments pledged by the government, that's clearly going to get used and optimized over the next year or two. I think there's an initial 250 million to be used immediately. So pop-up cycleways are going to be pretty key post and sort of during COVID-19, getting people back to work and getting goods moved in and out of inner city centres.
Thanks very much indeed, Adam, and thanks very much indeed to our online audience for those insightful questions. Once again, if you have any more questions for our final speaker, do punch them into the Q&A in the Zoom window there. I will move on now to our fifth and final speaker. And I'll introduce now Brad Kavin, who is the founder and CEO of Lieef and is ex-BlackRock. Brad, you're the money man. I'm sure that there'll be lots of questions coming in from our online audience for you. But first, the opening gambit question from me. Please do tell us all a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your experience, your background, and your new venture, Lieef.
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Brad Kavin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lieef, a sustainable investment platform. We focus on bridging the gap between venture capital and mature markets. One of our big focus areas right now is capital-intensive industries where we think we can create new forms of cash yield. Prior to Lieef, I was a founding member of BlackRock's renewable power and energy infrastructure business. And then before that, or after that, a founding member of Cowen Sustainable Investments as well. And glad to be here, by the way. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks very much indeed for that introduction. We're clearly in a super dynamic moment at the moment as we unlock from lockdown. What are your views as an investor on the long-term economic cycles we're facing and the need for cash yield?
Yeah, well, I think what's super exciting about electric vehicles is it kind of illustrates the first iteration of our maturation of the use of energy. You know, the amount of energy we use is a reflection of how advanced we are. And it's a cool story. A friend of mine who works at Thor Trucks, or now Exos Trucks, told me, this was 2.5 years ago, that when they tried charging their prototype vehicle, they blew 2 substations. And if you come from the power and energy investment world like I do, you know, the business is selling electrons, right? So if somebody's got a huge demand for energy, that's good for business. And the fact that one truck was capable of compromising the nearby grid, to me gave us an indication that there is a huge amount of demand for power eventually that will associate itself with this maturation. And so in that case, right, I built a simulation of an electric vehicle. And if you do the math, the amount of energy that we'll need to consume for wide mass adoption of EVs, both commercially and on the consumer side, is tremendous. And so, you know, your question about whether it's policy or it's investment, I think the policy has to change, not because it's bad, but because it's old. It's not designed for a system where you have demand for power or load that is dispatchable, meaning I can reroute traffic and as a result reroute the supply and demand dynamics of power itself. And so that construct doesn't exist. That's something that I had the opportunity to kind of create with the utility. And so, you know, that's exciting. But the other piece of that component is that type of infrastructure investment in conjunction with utility is what creates cash yield. And from an investment perspective, interest rates are negative or low. And, you know, who knows, they could go negative in the United States. And you have an aging population globally who needs to retire. And these are retirees that are going to be retired from pensions and endowments, and these folks are looking for ways to generate income. And there's a lot less income generation assets out there, and if they are existing, they are bid up and the returns are low. And so why not just create some new forms of cash yield? And so that's one of our areas of focus as an investment platform. And so to answer your question, policy I think is one, but investment is the other, because this all comes down to cost. Something people don't realize is that 30% of the cabs in New York City in 1907 were electric. Like, electric is not new. It's just the adoption and the maturation is at the right time now. And so in order for us to fully adopt to electric on the commercial side, I personally believe that it's a function of policy, but also investment. But that investment can be beneficial not just from a return perspective, but from an economic perspective, right? It creates jobs, it creates velocity of money, which then means that we may have some inflation, which means that maybe rates don't have to be negative anymore. And so that's the thing, is I think we should always think about the economic system we're facing as something we can influence, not something we have to sort of take as a given. But that's more of a philosophical point. But yeah, I think electric vehicle infrastructure is a huge investment opportunity. I think and the best part is that it's sustainable, but it makes money. It will make, and for some of these businesses that don't make money yet, they will. It's just about cost deflation. So if something is not profitable today, is the technology that it uses going to become increasingly cheap enough so that it will make money? And if people demand something, things get cheap. So, it's a great kind of cycle that we're seeing. And I say, to your point, COVID changes that dramatically as well. And it creates other opportunities in addition.
Thanks so much indeed, Brad. Very, very interesting opening gambit. So tell me a little bit more about your sense of the investment in the electric truck sector. I know that personally your happy place is perhaps investment in the charging infrastructure side, but what do you think are some of the opportunities for the truck sector with investment and investors?
Well, look, I try to avoid what I don't know or I don't understand. And if you look throughout history, in the early 20th century, there were thousands of vehicle companies, and then only a handful survived. And I'm not talented enough to pick winners amongst many. The benefit now, though, there's a few vehicle companies that are very focused and well equipped with capital, and so they may have the opportunity to succeed. Where I am excited on a vehicle side, if I were to be excited, is something that was focused on solving a social problem that people will pay money for, that creates a profit. And I know that sounds pretty simple, but if you look at most of these companies, they're focused on all sorts of amazing things except profits. But I do think in certain parts of the e-mobility space, perhaps the unit economics of the equipment may be sufficiently attractive to secure long-term contracts with municipalities and or cities that are profitable and are something that we would certainly invest in. But that doesn't mean that just because we won't invest in other types of things doesn't mean they can't be good investments. I don't know how to choose moonshoot kind of things. I try to set low expectations. That way I'm never disappointed.
Very good. So thank you very much indeed, Brad. One more from me then. There are a bunch of questions from our audience, so I'll open it up. I know from some of our previous chats that you have a clear sustainability mission, both as an individual and through Lieef. Can you tell us a little bit more about that sustainability narrative and Lief's vision within that narrative?
Yeah, sure. So, everybody I think has their own definition of what sustainability is. And the benefit is that, and this is a little different, but our perception of, society is a construction of the human mind, right? So what is sustainable today may not be tomorrow. But when you look back throughout history, you realize sustainability is not new. And it encompasses a lot more things than just emissions. It encompasses technology, biology, resource constraints. And what it really is it's taking the traditional method of evaluating economics and adding another dimension or a layer to it, which is resource constraints in certain cases. And so what's exciting about electric vehicles is that it represents an opportunity where we can improve productivity, improve our use of innovative technologies, but also do so in a way that is better for the environment. Again, EVs are not perfect. Batteries, when they degrade, are radioactive, so it's not perfect. But it's a step forward. But the other thing too is that the amount of power that we would consume as we move toward an EV world is a demonstration of the maturation of society, right? Like the more, physics, you can't change physics. If you want to do big things, you need big energy. Like that's kind of how it works. And so the more we learn how to adapt and use big energy, the likelihood of us doing big things is higher. And so taking that back to sustainability, I think it's not about using less energy and being green. It's more about using more energy and being productive. Because what ends up happening is by doing that, we waste less to begin with, right? Like it's not economically viable to create waste. So it's a lot more complicated than just emissions. We have our own kind of proprietary perspective based on my experience at my prior firms and my partner's experience. But there's no silver bullet. It's not a goal. It's how we get to the future. That's the challenge I have. Everyone thinks it's this goal. We're just going to become sustainable. And no, like you have to be sustainable as you transition into the future. Otherwise, there won't be a future.
Thanks so much indeed, Brad. Well, I won't use any more of my energy. I'll use some of the energy of our online audience. So there are a bunch of questions that have come in for you. One of them is from Paul Contreras, who asks a question around timing. His question is, a lot of investments in the EV sector have failed. Why is now a good time to invest?
It may not be. Again, like that's the benefit of time. I'll give you some stats though. So in 1907, 30% of all vehicles sold in this country were electric. And it was in 1912 that the electric vehicle started to kind of face its demise. And the reason why was at the time, you had to hand crank a vehicle to start it up. And somebody was smart enough to take a gasoline vehicle and put a fuel pump system that allowed you to no longer have to hand crank the car to turn it on. Now, it's in combination with that and the cost and complexity of the infrastructure to charge electric vehicles, which was very immature back then, that made electric vehicles not the most competitive technology. But if you look at it today, and again, it's ironic, right? Like the first EV was invented right at the same time as the gasoline vehicle, and the battery was invented in the 1700s technically. So like technology as it gets invented takes about 100 years to adopt if it's capital intensive, and that cycle's starting to change with productivity increases. But the point is the difference between then and today is that the convenience of an electric vehicle, which is really the important part for the consumer, is there now. People want access to these things. And so if people want things, the costs to produce them will deflate. And those costs are right on the cusp of being competitive now. It's so close today versus 100 years ago that it's not a matter of if, but when. And I think it's very soon, not because there's a ton of millennials that have a lot of disposable income to buy the vehicles, but I think it's because on the fleet side of things, I think if you drive enough miles, the cost of owning an electric vehicle, if you're purchasing power at a relatively attractive price, will make it pencil much faster. And so I see this opportunity as fleets not being immediate, but being the most commercialized at scale. And then over time, the other industries will mature and adopt them. But again, I could be wrong, and there could be a deal that I'm going to look at yesterday or in a week, and and my perspective will change. I always change my mind when I'm wrong, and I'm wrong often.
Very good. So thanks so much indeed, Brad. There are a bunch of other questions now from the online audience, but I'll like to open up some questions between our panelists whilst we wait for our production team to open up the screens of everybody. Thank you very much indeed for all of your insightful analysis around the electric vehicle trucks sector. I think we can all agree that it's a super exciting and dynamic time, probably a bit more exciting and dynamic than all of us really bargained for this year, but that's where we are, and some really interesting things will evolve across policy, investment, marketing, and technology in the next few months, I am sure. So I'd like to take an opportunity then to open up some questions between the panelists. Are there any, you've all been listening attentively to the discussion, I'm sure. Let me just check who has a question. Claire, I believe you have a question for Heidi. Could you elaborate more on the policy side of things post-COVID-19 and whether that will push forward the electrification of the trucks sector?
That's an excellent question, Claire. I think so. I think, and while we're working very closely with the Environmental Defense Fund, Natural Resources Defense Council, and CalSTART, the governor's office, I'm looking for opportunities to electrify segments where there is momentum. And clearly, you know, this panel and wonderful speakers have provided sufficient evidence to show that there is momentum right now in this sector, where we are looking to partner more closely with our members, and we form task forces at the local level and the state level, is to get a better sense of how we can best support our transit agencies. As I mentioned, we were very strong supporters of the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, which requires our 166 public transit agencies here in California to shift their procurements to zero emission buses by 2029 and fully stop all operation of non-zero emission vehicles by 2040. The hybrid voucher incentive program, which supports the financing through vouchers, is year after year oversubscribed, and the demand for that program is at 325 million for this fiscal year. We support that budget request. So the question that we've put before the appropriators is the extent to which the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, if it's approved on June 25th, if it would compete with funding for transit agencies for these incentives. And what we've heard from the Air Resources Board staff is that the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule assumes that no incentives will be available for the deployment of and incentivization of clean trucks. So that is, good news in part for the electrification of the transit sector, but we still are trying to get a better sense of, what extent our member companies are going to be encouraging more of their employees to work from home. And we also support legislation to expedite CEQA clearance of complete streets to enable, the use of bikes and other modes of active transportation.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Heidi. Claire, I believe you have a question for Rob, which might be more on the commercial side. Over to you, Claire, to ask your question to Rob, please.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the interesting presentation, Rob, or speech. Certainly excited to hear what you guys are doing as a company. I think one of the questions that came to mind for me was about how you're thinking about product development and your manufacturing strategy for the vehicle.
Yeah, I think the structure of the business that we have is actually, we recognize that getting to market quickest is a very significant factor here. There is a lot of noise from incumbent OEMs who are sort of talking about moving into this space and sort of making playful moves at it. So actually, a lot of our proposition is about getting to market very, very quickly. We are aiming to have 500 trucks on the road less than 2 years after you start the production model engineering process. So very, very quick turnaround in timeframes. And to facilitate that, our skill sets and our teams are based around designers and engineers. We want to design, we want to engineer, but we also want to incorporate product lines where we can do so. You can bring in robust technology, because coming from an operator background, I can tell you that actually reliability of the vehicle is worth more than anything else you can possibly think of. That security of knowing you can turn up every day and have a vehicle working is most important. So we're going for a route of engineering our own products, of integrating existing supply chains which we can use, and then we are going to use third-party manufacturing as well. And going back to Brad's point as well, that doesn't mean I have to go and find another £250 million somewhere to build a factory somewhere. We can look at utilising an existing location, and that's how we see our opportunity to get to market in a very, very quick time frame. And I think really kind of driving this from our side is there's an underlying principle in our business where we want to be part of change. and hopefully it's a commercially successful proposition as well. But underlying actually our co-founders' principles was going out and actually making a change and having an impact on people's lives, particularly inside city centres. So actually a lot of the work which we do is around finding routes to market quicker, finding ways to bring materials and suppliers into our ecosystem to allow us to build these vehicles faster and quicker.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. Adam, I believe you have a question for Brad around investment criteria. If you'd like to fire your question Brad's way, please.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to know what your thoughts were on the investment criteria for new and emerging markets in the EV/e-mobility sector, especially going into the US market.
When you say emerging markets, do you mean an emerging industry or an emerging market like Africa or a new region?
I mean emerging sectors of vehicles. So rather than just being truck, you've obviously got all of these other micromobility functions that are a real option now, like you were saying.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, everyone has their own investment methodology and parameters. And the ones that I know how to use and the ones that we use are sort of the following. We look for proven technologies. So technologies that are not, that don't have enough operating history to demonstrate that they're somewhat reliable or reliable at the very least. And then we really look for, obviously, the right management teams that have experience doing what they're doing or something super close to it, obviously. But then lastly, it's a commercialization strategy. And that's kind of the irony is this right now. You see tons of amazingly largely funded companies that have these amazing ideas, and no one has the slightest clue how to make money. I don't know if they never worked at a lemonade stand or what. And so I think that's the best thing is like, if someone has a concept or a business model that makes money and I can build an Excel model that demonstrates that, then that's a win-win. And again, an example is the electric vehicle charging station power purchase agreement. That was created on Excel on a plane. Like, if something makes money and you understand the engineering, it works. And so that's the one thing I would say is that, marketing's great. And the cost of marketing with social media is like nothing now. But marketing is not anywhere near as hard as putting a product together, demonstrating customer demand, quality customer demand, I should add. And so to us, opportunities where there's clear customer demand, the unit economics pencil, there's a utilization of that technology or resource that is sufficient to generate positive free cash. Again, you can sell a charging station for a profit, but you have to use it a lot to start making money. And so it's those kinds of things that are very focused for us. That being said, there is all sorts of investment platforms out there that make investments in things that do not make money and may never make money. And so, there is a funding model for businesses that have great ideas that can raise capital. But to me, to your point, the parameters are, if you have a business that will make money very soon, and you can clearly articulate how you're going to make money and why you know how to make money. Again, look, it's simple. But it's just, that's not easy. But again, those are the pretty simple parameters, from my perspective, at least.
Thanks very much indeed. What I would like to do, though, is to return to our online poll before we start to wrap things up. So once again, if I could ask you on the panel and you in the online audience to vote on which of those four criteria you think the levers of the electric trucks sector should pull in terms of whether there should be a move towards greater policy incentives, whether there should be more marketing incentives, whether there should be a shift to the rapid deployment of technology, or whether investment is the key to unlocking the electric truck sector. If you could all vote now, please, and then I will take a look at those and we'll see whether policy is still in first place or whether it's shifted slightly in the new scheme of things off the back of hearing our excellent speakers deliver their views on the electric truck sector. If everyone could vote now, please, then I will have a look at those interesting new developments. Whilst that vote is being made, I'd like to thank all five speakers very much indeed for your excellent contribution to the debate around the electric truck sector. I'm sure it's going to be a super exciting place to watch over the next few months and years, and hopefully will go a long way to decarbonizing the transport sector. That's certainly our goal here at GreenTV. We're all about communicating sustainability. The results are now in. Slight shift. Policy still in number one at 33% of the vote. Technology and investment vying for second position. Very, very narrow. Technology coming in at 32%. Investment at 30%. So Brad, perhaps you're not as key to this whole thing as I.
Good.
And unfortunately, my area of the subject marketing, a lowly 5%, slightly up from its previous marker. So interesting results there. Perhaps if we'd have added charging infrastructure into the mix, we'd have had a different take on it. But that's one for another conversation, another day. So thank you very much indeed, Heidi, Rob, Claire, Adam, and Brad, for an excellent opening introduction to the EV Summit online series. We couldn't really have had a better start to proceedings. The thunder and the electrification of the atmosphere here in the thunderstorm that hit Oxford just before we started off missed us, but we had a lot of electrification in the atmosphere across the debate. And thanks very much indeed to our online audience for your excellent questions and contribution, and to your insights via the poll. So we will finish up now. Thanks very much indeed to everyone for joining us, and do check out some updates on the next installment of the EV Summits online series. Once again, thank you very much indeed from me. Thank you from each of our panelists, and we wish you an exciting new journey as we wend our way through the rest of the EV year. Thanks very much indeed.